Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 28 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello there, college football fans. And oh my gosh, it's been 28.
I know, we're getting close to 30. We're going to be so old. Older than me, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
That's
Exactly.
Right. All right, well, it seems like we jinx ourselves sometimes on these. I remember last week we were talking about how, week 11 of the college football season wasn't looking like it was going to be as good as week 10 because there didn't seem to be as many, high tier matchups in terms of top 10 teams playing each other and things like that. But then we had quite a number of crazy upsets that people weren't expecting. So this turned out to be a great week of college football.
Yes, it did. Absolutely. Well, there was, like you say, upsets and all kinds of different things. So
we'll dive into it. For those of you who don't know, this is College Football Throwdown, a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. This father-son duo here bringing it to you every week. And we just finished watching up ESPN's coverage of the playoff rankings, the new college football playoff rankings that were later today because they were doing them from one of these new the college basketball premier game. So that was kind of interesting. It was funny. I was seeing kids poking their head into Kirk Herbstreit's shots and stuff.
Yes,
it was funny.
A little bit crazy when you got the live audience in the background.
That's true. Before we recap the best games of Week 11, we should, per our tradition, crack a cold beverage for the podcast. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna get to do the honors tonight since it's getting late for me, and it'd be a nice way to go to bed.
There it is. All right. Cool. So, yes, in terms of those big games, I was looking back at our previous episode. I think we got so caught up in our discussions on the playoffs and speculating we forgot to do predictions. So I don't think we had any.
Okay.
But
that's okay.
The game that was, we knew was going to be the big game of last week was Oklahoma-Baylor, and it did not disappoint. Oklahoma ended up upsetting Baylor 44-34 in a hard-fought, good Big 12 battle.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly Oklahoma, actually had control of that game. The final score is probably not indicative of how much Oklahoma, handled the game and just the strength with which Oklahoma's defense played quite well. For this team from Baylor, who has been so explosive against so many of these teams early in the season. And we're just putting up absolute pinball numbers. And now all of a sudden we find ourselves, 2 weeks in a row where they've not put up nearly as many points,
Right.
So they're kind of coming back down to reality.
Although, and they were just talking about this on the ESPN show again, do you take into account the fact that Baylor and now TCU, the team Oklahoma's going to be playing this week, are both playing with their second-string quarterbacks?
I was just going to mention that. Yep, exactly. I mean, they lost basically the trigger man, right?
Right.
For those offenses, and that just shows you how important, particularly with the way that the rules are set up now, and the way that a lot of the coaches are choosing to set up their offense. They rely so heavily on a quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. And so when that quarterback isn't able to go because of injury or whatever, it has a huge impact on the teams.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked a lot on our podcast about, the importance of the running game, something that our Nebraska's offensive coordinator needed to kind of get through his head. And one of the things of that is, with the passing game, you are completely reliant on your quarterback in terms of how good he is at passing. Obviously you have your wide receivers who need to be good as well, but the quarterback really is central to that. And the quarterback is central to running the ball too in terms of handing it off, or if your quarterback is a great runner. But they're not as central because you can typically rely on your running backs and your tight ends and stuff for that sort of performance. So that's another reason why having a strong running game is a important facet.
Absolutely. And when you lose that, and in the case of these zone read offenses, where the zone read is basically a core, it's the fundamental of so many of the running plays. And all of a sudden you don't have a quarterback that's quite as fleet of foot. That can have a huge impact on your team.
Another interesting game, Alabama Mississippi State. I know Alabama was the favorite in that game, obviously, but I think they surprised people with just how dominant they were. Their running back Henry had another like 200 plus yard game, really putting himself up in that Heisman consideration.
I would agree. I think, particularly given what's going to happen here, you look at the rest of Alabama's schedule, and they have a couple of games left here. One of them is against nobody, and then they have Auburn. And Auburn's defense has not shown itself to be too good, and so I would be shocked if Alabama's running back doesn't have another 200-yard game, because that's exactly what Coach Saban wants to do. He's going to want to pound that rock in that game.
That's right. And then this is an interesting game. One of the upsets, big one, Oregon beating Stanford 38-36.
Oh, yes. And Oregon looked pretty good doing it, too. So that puts a lot of turmoil into things, and that probably is a great transition into our discussion about the top 25 as identified by the committee.
Yeah, but we got a lot more. We have a lot of upsets here that you're skipping over, man.
I know, but that's what I mean. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the other one I was going to mention, obviously, was Utah losing to Arizona. That was definitely an upset, 30-37.
I keep forgetting about that one because it happened so late. I didn't even realize it happened. You're the one who had to tell me.
Yep, because the interesting thing with that in terms of the wider discussion on college football is it's going to be really hard for the Pac-12 to get any team into that top four now with both those teams losing.
Absolutely. You have no team in the Pac-12 that has less than two losses, less than two losses. So it's going to be very hard for them to get in. And ironically, the Stanford loss is as impactful on Notre Dame, even though they won, as anything.
Yeah, kind of interesting how now we're like, teams, if you're in that hunt for those top four spots, you're kind of cheering for the teams you've beaten as well as the teams you're going to play because you want them to be like the best that they can be in terms of record and everything like that. Because even, those little slip-ups in terms of their perception when they play you, can affect your ranking.
That's right. And obviously when you're talking about things like how a team looks, not just did they win, but how did they look while winning, right? Those that feel test, if you will, is becoming more and more of a factor in the lexicon of college football.
Yep. And we had quite a few close games for some of those top ranked teams. Iowa winning over Minnesota 40-35. We had where was it? Michigan playing against Indiana and having to go into double overtime in order to beat them 48-41. And there was one more. What was it? What was it? Well, there's TCU Kansas as well, I suppose. That one was closer than people were expecting. Maybe it was just Michigan. Maybe Michigan was the one. No, that was it. Oklahoma State, Iowa State, 35-31.
Yeah, it was close. Yeah, it was a near upset.
Right.
Now, had that happened, that would have been a devastating for the Big 12.
Oh yeah,
it's a huge deal that Iowa State didn't pull that off. If Iowa State had pulled that upset off, I think it would have been very detrimental to anybody who made it through the Big 12 at that point.
Yeah.
Because then the prestige of, Oklahoma's going to need the prestige of beating an Oklahoma State for them to be able to get over the hump of Notre Dame with their one loss being to Texas.
Yeah.
They're going to need Oklahoma State to be ranked very high.
Yeah. Well,
and so they got their wish basically. But it still remains to be seen whether Oklahoma State can handle it
Right.
with the next games that they play.
Well, and even we were discussing before, even if that ideal scenario plays out and Oklahoma plays against an undefeated Oklahoma State team and beats them, with their one loss to Texas and Notre Dame having beaten Texas badly earlier in the year, if Notre Dame also only has one loss by the end of the season, that they still might find themselves looking in on that championship.
Absolutely, it'll be a hard one to argue. And the strongest argument, of course, will be that Oklahoma will have beaten, particularly recently and late in the season, a very highly ranked Oklahoma State team, a very highly ranked Baylor team, and a respectable TCU.
Right. Although talking about that respectable TCU thing and what we were talking about before in terms of those, quarterback injuries to TCU and Baylor, I was honestly surprised seeing that TCU Kansas score 23-17 because Kansas currently has 0 wins. They're one of the worst teams in Division I football, and for you to win only by 6 points, to have that team put up 17 points against you and keep you to 23, your offense that was scoring 60 points a game not so long ago, that's definitely a worrying sign, I think, for TCU.
That's true, and frankly, TCU's defense has been giving up a lot of points. Well, and then here's the other thing with the whole Texas loss by Oklahoma. Texas lost to West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it just all these losses and how they stack up and how they redefine the value of a win or a loss are all things that are going to have an impact as we go forward in these next 2 weeks. And, this great thing about this new college football playoff, just a great thing.
Oh, yeah. And then I would love to be an Arkansas fan right about now because they've had 2 back-to-back weeks of upsets that they were not expected to win. They beat LSU this week 31-14. Quite an interesting win.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and it sucks to be an LSU fan to go from number 2 to number 15 in the course of 2 weeks.
Right. But that's the way it goes, right?
Yep.
That's the nature of how that process works out. And I love the fact that they don't necessarily worry about what the numbers were last week. Like even in this particular setup, that this particular top 25 that they produced today, Oklahoma State. Let's see, ended up being Iowa and then Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State is 6th.
Yep.
And Baylor, who was 6th, dropped quite a bit to kind of push themselves kind of out of the deal. But Oklahoma State moved up 3 or something. So this ability to move people around is I think really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
So that at the end of the day, when that very final one comes up, there's going to be some excitement, especially if it plays out anything like what we're speculating it might. There may be some question about who that 4th team is.
Right. Well, and it almost makes it seem a little silly that we're obsessing and debating over these rankings as much as we are every week when we know that what we're talking about is just going to be thrown out the window by the next week and won't be at all relevant to that, end of the season discussion.
Right. But that's what allows you to have all of this. You know what I mean? It's still conversation about college football, right? And it's exciting stuff, and it gets fan bases all riled up. It's quite the crazy deal.
Oh, it is. And then last 2 games I want to mention were Washington State upsetting UCLA 31-27, and Houston beating Memphis 35-34 in a very close game.
Yes. Now, what was the one that you said just before that?
Washington State beat UCLA in the Pac-12.
Beat UCLA. Interesting. So the old Pirate pulled off a fast one on UCLA.
Yeah.
Boy, that's those are interesting notes because all of a sudden, you're beginning to see Nebraska had a series of injuries early in the year that just put them behind the 8 ball. And ironically, Nebraska going into their bye week after week 11, right, is finally getting some time to heal, and they are as healthy today before the bye week as they've been the entire season. And now some of these other teams who who sustained a significant number of losses, much like we did, are starting to see those number of losses kind of add up, right?
Yep. Well,
Again,
and
teams like UCLA, and that's what makes Notre Dame even that much more impressive. I mean, Notre Dame lost their quarterback, they lost their number one running back, they lost some really significant players that in most teams, if you lost those players off your team, most people would have to adjust their expectations. And Notre Dame still sits with one loss.
yep, that is definitely a factor. That does bring up an interesting conversation, I think, about the playoff in general in terms of when you're considering these. Is it more important to look at like the total resume in terms of like how you played your season versus who is playing the best football as of at the end of week 13, or week 14 after the, championship games of college football? Who are the best teams right now at this moment? Because they were talking again on the ESPN thing about how Alabama lost, earlier in the year, but right now, with this Henry kid on fire, and them beating some of the better SEC teams that they've had to go up against, I mean, they're playing as good a football as anybody else at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing is, I think the answer is all of the above. I mean, the fact is that that committee is looking at all of those. They are looking at resume. They are looking at comparative scores if that opportunity is available to them, like the Texas games for Notre Dame and Oklahoma. Those will be a factor. But it will also be a factor is what have you done for me lately? Where are you as a team right now? All of those things enter in because all of those are part of what they're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
They are trying to get the four best teams in, but you have to have done it consistently through the year. That consistency matters. But what you're doing at the end of the year and obviously winning your conference is also super critical. And that whole conference winning component hasn't even come into play yet because no one's won their conference yet.
Right.
So that's going to have an impact on not only who the four teams are, but what their individual rankings are.
Yeah. Well, and with what we were just talking about in terms of like, okay, let's go back to this. Let's say Notre Dame beats out who they're supposed to beat. They beat Stanford, and Oklahoma beats TCU and beats undefeated at the moment, Oklahoma State, and so they have their one loss is Oklahoma's one loss is to Texas. That's right. Whereas Notre Dame beat Texas in their regular season. So in that scenario, if the committee were to look at that and be like, well, Notre Dame's one loss is to Clemson, whereas Oklahoma's is to Texas, and they'd say that Notre Dame deserves it over Oklahoma in that case. I feel like that's even more of a reason, adding on to last year's debate, for why the Big 12 needs a conference championship game. Because in that scenario, if Oklahoma were to play another game and win that game, and so they have one more quality victory over Notre Dame, I think that might be the kind of factor that they would need in order to push them over Notre Dame, since they don't play a conference championship game.
I would absolutely agree with you. And I think there's a very real possibility that could happen because I think that's a really strong argument. I think it's really hard for me to overcome. I know that it happened earlier in the year and stuff. Notre Dame got to play Texas in the first game of the year and won comfortably. And then, it was still fairly early in the year that Oklahoma played that same that same Texas team and got spanked. So then the question becomes, how can you ignore those two facts? Those are facts. Yes, Notre Dame's schedule didn't turn out to be quite as difficult as maybe it was perceived to be going into the season, but the fact is they won every one of those games, with the exception of losing in a fairly tight battle to the team that is right now the consensus one. For that committee. So I would have a hard time moving Notre Dame, even if Oklahoma won out. I think a lot of people on that committee are going to have a hard time moving Oklahoma State ahead of Notre Dame. So
So I think it's a very real possibility that the Big 12 could be left on the outside looking in.
Yeah, well, and especially if, like, we were just talking about TCU, playing a little close with Kansas. If those wins against the TCUs and the Baylors don't look as good as they might have, a couple weeks ago, that might
Right.
be a factor in terms of looking at Oklahoma's quality of resume.
Absolutely. Like if you had Baylor beat Oklahoma State this week, right?
Right.
That would be very detrimental to Oklahoma's case if they were to win out. The only strong case for the Big 12, really, that's clear, is Oklahoma State winning out.
That's true. Yep.
Then I think it's pretty clear that they're the team that gets in, and Notre Dame is set aside.
Yep. We've been talking about the playoff, but we haven't actually talked about who they announced as are the top teams. For those who may not know, the top four remained exactly the same as last week: Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Iowa stayed at number 5, and then Oklahoma State moved up to number 6 because of some of the losses and the fact that they won. Oklahoma 7, Florida 8, Michigan State 9, Baylor 10, Stanford 11. Interesting, because of Stanford's loss, now that could be the one factor, that might be going against Notre Dame is now that Stanford game that people were talking just last week about it being a, automatic qualifying game.
Right.
A play-in game, right? Now that it definitely doesn't look that way anymore.
No. Well, and here's the other thing. I'm really surprised Stanford didn't fall further because, they lost to an Oregon team that going into the game wasn't ranked.
True. Well, I think it's got to do with the fact that, Baylor lost too, and, other teams that were ranked above them lost. So
Right. But Baylor's still ahead of them is the point. So
true.
That didn't necessarily affect Stanford so much, but I just would have thought that Stanford might have actually dropped a little more than they did. So that's just an interesting thing to keep in eyesight. And my previous statement where I talked about Notre Dame's out. I'm being presumptive here that Clemson's not going to get upset.
Yeah.
At any point here the rest of the year.
Right.
Ohio State's not going to get upset. Things get way more complicated if Michigan State beats Ohio State this weekend, or worse for the Big Ten, Michigan ends up beating Ohio State after Michigan State has beaten Michigan, because now you got a Michigan team that has the really close loss to Indiana. Close win to Indiana. The controversial loss to Michigan State, and no other conference losses. So, wham bam, they're now the representative, and they're playing Iowa.
Right.
So there's all kinds of stuff, and if what we hope happens, and Nebraska beats an 11-0 Iowa team, and they become 11-1, that hurts the Big Ten a little bit too. So.
Yep.
It's not a foregone conclusion. If it's anybody other than Ohio State, it is not a foregone conclusion that the Big Ten champion is in.
That's true. Well, and as we said, it's possible if Iowa beats, the two teams they have left and beats Ohio State, you'd be hard pressed to leave them out.
Oh, right. An undefeated team, I think, from the Big Ten as Big Ten champion would likely get in. Where it gets rough is if there's a one-loss Big Ten team that gets in, that is anybody other than Ohio State.
Right. Well, and I just think that gets to a point that's interesting. We've been talking all this time about who's going to be the number 4 because that's the most interesting one to talk about. And we're presuming that Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State are all going to win out, which is certainly possible, maybe even likely. But certainly not a given, especially seeing how we saw these teams in the top 10 get upset this week.
Right.
And
even Clemson, struggled and had a very modest victory margin over a Syracuse team that's really struggled this year.
Yep. Well, and I believe in the ACC, the team that is the only other real contender besides Clemson is North Carolina. So that'll be an interesting game when that one comes around.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. On the last podcast, we talked about our own top sixes. I believe we had, and I believe you were talking about as of week 10. These were your six, and yours was Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Alabama, Baylor, and Stanford.
Right.
Right. And then mine, mine was more looking ahead to the future and predicting what it would be at the end of the season, was Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, and Utah, and Notre Dame, I should say. So my Utah pick is not looking so hot now.
Well, and you were sweating bullets on that Oklahoma State thing too.
Yeah, well, because there's a lot of different ways that could go, but I mean, that's why I am really cheering for Oklahoma State this weekend. I want them to go all the way because they're my prediction based on the fact. I mean, they play all their toughest opponents. They play at home. That there's not that's got to be a factor.
The only reason I don't want to do that is I don't want the Big Ten to be left out.
Yeah.
And an Oklahoma State winning out increases the likelihood that the Big Ten champion, again, if it's anybody other than an undefeated Ohio State, is potentially the one left out.
Mm-hmm. That's certainly possible. And then, obviously, as of week 6, you had Baylor and Stanford up there in that top 6, and now both of them are out of that consideration.
Right. Yep. That's why we play the games, as they say. So, it's been really a fascinating season, and a lot of interesting things happening, unexpected things, like always happens. Is what I want to say, these unexpected wins and losses, all the injuries that some teams have sustained, some of which who've overcome them, others of which haven't. UCLA has had just a devastating year of injuries, and it's really affected them as a team, and it's certainly part of the reason for their loss this past weekend. And there's just a lot of teams that are disappointed, including our Nebraska Cornhuskers. So.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then that was another thing that they talked about in terms of how do you consider when you're looking at those things, do you consider the fact that Oklahoma beat a Baylor team that wasn't playing their starting quarterback? How much do you think about those extraneous factors? Weather, and I mean, if you go down that rabbit hole, you can get into all sorts of factors.
Absolutely, and the bottom line is injuries are part of the game. You just kind of have to look forward and see what you think's happening at this point in time, and what are the chances that they're going to be able to continue the string and finish off the job, or is it maybe more likely that they're not? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what I think is interesting, I'm looking into because I'm happy with my picks from last week, with the exception of Utah. So based on now, I'm trying to figure out what my number 6 team might be. In terms of, because I mean, I think if Utah were to, win out, and then some of those teams that are above them, like in my scenario, Oklahoma, Michigan State, Baylor, Stanford, Michigan would all be losing games. So if Utah could keep winning, then maybe that does bump them back up into that consideration.
Now, I'll tell you, if I was looking at mine, I would say, and again, I'm looking at the here and now, I'm going to say that, wow, I'm struggling with who my number 6 is going to be.
Right. Well, because
I'm going to have to say my number 6 is going to be Oklahoma. Actually, no, my number 6 is going to be Iowa. My number 5 is going to be Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. My number 4 is going to be Notre Dame. My number 3 is actually going to be Ohio State. My number 2 is Clemson, and my number 1 is Alabama.
Interesting. So you think kind of with that whole, who's playing the best football right now kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you ask me who's the team I would pick that if we started a round robin tournament of those 6 teams right now this weekend, and that was going to determine the national champion, I would put my money on Alabama, no question about it, and Clemson would be second, and Ohio State would be third. After that, Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, those I'm not sure. The order could be anything, but those first 3 I'm pretty confident about.
Interesting. And you're still ranking Oklahoma above. I mean, I guess to rank Oklahoma above Oklahoma State this week does make some sense, given that Oklahoma State struggled against an inferior Iowa State team, whereas
Right.
Oklahoma beat a good Baylor team.
Well, and I watched Oklahoma play, and I love the leadership they're getting out of that quarterback position now, and that guy has just grown into the role. They're a very different team than the one that lost to Texas, and I believe that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I've been thinking about it because, like, in terms of the teams who are ranked above Utah right now, under my scenario, Oklahoma would have 2 losses, Florida would have 2 losses because they'd lose to Alabama, Michigan State would lose to Ohio State, Baylor would lose against Oklahoma State in this scenario, Stanford would lose against Notre Dame, Michigan would lose against Ohio State. So if all those things played out in that way, then it seems like Utah would jump back up to that spot with 2 losses.
They could, yeah, but that's an awful lot to have to happen before they could do that.
That's true. Oops. All right. I started playing a YouTube video by accident there. All right. So, any other things you want to say about the playoff rankings this week?
Other than the fact that I think, this week's games are going to go a long way in starting to really clarify, right? I mean, this is obviously it's only 1 week before the end of the season, so that's not profound, but the bottom line is that I think, when after this weekend's games are done, we'll really see the separation start to happen. And I think the number of what-if scenarios greatly diminishes.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, it's definitely going to be interesting. Let me pull it up here. What I'm a little bit interested in is Navy. They still have, I had their schedule pulled up before. They have they play against Houston, I believe, who's currently undefeated. So that's a big game left on their schedule. They're the highest ranked, non-Power 5 team at the moment.
Yeah, and what happens if they stay undefeated and win out? Well, obviously a lot of losses and weird things would have to happen among the Power 5, but you sure have to start to give some credibility to that Houston team and asking yourself what's going to go on with that.
Right.
For another podcast, certainly is the job that coach who was the offensive coordinator for Ohio State is now the head coach at Houston, has done just a phenomenal job, and it'll be interesting to see as these coaching carousel things happen, what's going to transpire with a guy like that.
Although, I doubt he would leave Houston. Has he literally only been there a year?
Yeah, he's just been there 1 year.
I mean, I don't know. That would seem like kind of a dick move to me. Like, I know that he doesn't want to probably stay at Houston. He wants a top Power 5 job, but I don't feel like you could leave after just 1 year, even if it was such a great year.
Right.
But
right.
Maybe I'm
wrong.
Well,
that's just. I guess my point was going to be that's going to be a conversation for a whole this podcast or series of podcasts, really.
Yep.
And my other disappointment about this upcoming weekend is I'm disappointed the timing of the Michigan State Ohio State game. It's back to that whole long-standing tradition of the Big Ten not playing very many night games. They didn't play any at all, and now they play very limited number of night games in November. And now here we've got this premier game that is the biggest game of the year in the conference up to this point, and likely for the whole season. And it's going to be played at 3:30 in the afternoon, not a night game.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that makes it even worse because your alma mater is playing in the semifinals of the high school playoffs at the same time, and so we're going to be at that instead of.
Ooh, that's got to be creating a lot of division amongst the dads of
Oh, yeah,
SF
absolutely.
players.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how I can get my dish to work so that
motorhome it.
we'll be able to come in there and watch TV at halftime, go into the motorhome and watch it at halftime. So I got to get my dish down there.
All right. Well, as I said before, just to wrap up the playoff conversation, I'm actually looking at it. I'm going to stick with Utah as my number 6 because I'm going to predict that the teams above them are going to lose and they're going to win the Pac-12. So having that, they'll be the Pac-12 champions. That's how I think they'll sneak their way back into it. Obviously, talking about the upcoming Week 12 games, definitely one of the big ones is Michigan State, Ohio State. Huge game in the Big Ten and nationally.
Yep. Are you looking for me to give you a prediction now?
Not yet. We're going to get to that.
Good.
There's really, don't worry. There's 3 major games this weekend, which is exciting. We got that. We have Baylor, Oklahoma State, and then TCU, Oklahoma within the Big 12. So.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. It seems like there should be more than that, but we're at the point where the SEC's playing their late season patsies, so a lot of those SEC games probably aren't all that great.
Yeah, there's some LSU Ole Miss will probably be a good game. There's Oregon USC and Cal Stanford in the Pac-12. Mississippi State plays Arkansas after Arkansas's coming off of their victories. Northwestern Wisconsin in the Big Ten. UCLA Utah. Actually, that's a good one. Memphis and Temple, Michigan and Penn State. Nice historic game there.
Michigan, Penn State will be a good one. Yep, absolutely. We should include that in our
predictions.
Predictions. Michigan, Penn State, along with the other 3.
Cool.
Okay.
Yep. All right then. So, so you want to make 4 different predictions then? You're saying?
We're gonna do 4.
Oh boy. Okay, we're gonna make up for missing last week. Apparently.
There you go.
Okay. Let's start with Ohio State, Michigan State.
Wait a minute. Before we do the predictions, we have to concede, since we're trying to be objective people here. We can't have this podcast without acknowledging the elephant in the room when it comes to Nebraska and the bad national attention that they're receiving today. As the story breaks about a couple of players, including our starting quarterback and our wide receiver, who happen to have room together on an off-campus apartment, and apparently there is an accusation of a rape allegation that occurred there, and that's just happening on this day, and it's just you don't know what's transpired really yet. But it's horrible timing at a minimum, and a horrific event if it turns out that it actually happened the way it's purported to have happened. So we'll have to wait and see how that all unveils. At this point, the university, and after some initial comments to one of the local papers there in Nebraska, the players are mum on this deal, and we'll have to probably be very patient to figure out what really took place here.
Yeah.
But at this point, it would appear that it is not one of those 2 players that actually was involved in the incident. Rather, it was more that it occurred at their home, where they were hosting a gathering, a party, after the players returned from New Jersey and the Rutgers game.
Yeah, I want to make that clear, because when I was, if you just look at the headline, it says like attempted rape at Tommy Armstrong's house, and it makes you immediately jump to that conclusion. Whereas it would certainly appear that they were interviewed by the police, but it would appear from the sounds of what has transpired that they are not the suspect in question, who has not been named as of yet.
That's correct.
Yes.
And so that's the thing that's going to have to be sorted out here, and eventually we'll probably know a few more details, but right now we don't.
Yep, that's probably another benefit of having that bye week. We don't have to deal with that and then play a game on Saturday. We get a full week and a half to deal with that.
And hopefully the investigation will move quickly, and they'll be able to exonerate those kids if they are truly not guilty in this situation.
All right. So back to Michigan State, Ohio State. We're going to do predictions here.
Predictions, okay.
Okay. I am going to go ahead and predict a defensive battle. Michigan State is known for its defense, and Ohio State has played solid defense as well. Obviously, Ohio State's offensive firepower is formidable and would be difficult for Michigan State to stop, but I'm going to go ahead and predict an Ohio State victory of, let's say, 24-17.
Wow, okay, 24-17. Do you want me to predict on that same game right now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So my prediction on that is going to be quite different than yours. For the following reasons, I believe this is going to be a relatively easy Ohio State victory. Number one, it's Ohio State at home. Number two, Michigan State's senior quarterback Connor Cook has been banged up and, in fact, injured his shoulder in the game this past week. Their defense has struggled a bit, and in fact, against Nebraska, when they lost the game against us, they were actually playing three freshmen at times in their defensive secondary. And I have a feeling that if they do that against the talent of Ohio State, they're going to get crushed. Now, I'm not predicting a crush necessarily, but I think that it will be close early simply because the two teams in a big-time atmosphere like this, a big-time game, they'll play it a little bit close to the vest. But I believe that it won't take terribly long, and Ohio State will establish themselves, and they'll end up winning by about 3 scores. So I'm going to say 42-21.
Wow, yeah, that is quite a difference.
Yeah.
I will say I did read that Connor Cook, it sounds like he's good to go for this weekend. Now, we don't know if he'll be 100% necessarily, but he will play from the sounds of it.
Well, and I'm not hopeful that the score that I just gave you is what happens. I mean, I would very much like to see it be a very competitive game. In fact, I probably would like to see Michigan State win the game. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think the number of injuries and just the circumstances that Michigan State finds itself in is going to be a very tough one to do. And it's not easy to play at Ohio State.
That's true. All right, now we're going to do Baylor, Oklahoma State next. Since I am the resident Oklahoma State fan here, apparently, I'm going to go ahead and I actually think I'm going to predict a similar score to that of the Baylor-Oklahoma game. I'm going to go ahead and predict a 44-34 victory for Oklahoma State over Baylor.
Okay. I'm going to also predict an Oklahoma State victory because they play a lot more aggressively defensively at home, and because of Baylor's struggles with their new quarterback, who just doesn't present the same athletic challenge to defenses that the previous quarterback did. And so I'm going to predict an Oklahoma State victory. I'm going to say that it's also going to be fairly high scoring. So I'm going to say Oklahoma State is going to go ahead and hang 50 points on Baylor. So it's going to be 52-36.
Okay. And then TCU Oklahoma. I'm gonna go bold here. I think, given the fact that TCU struggled a little bit against Kansas last week, and given how dominant Oklahoma's defense was in that Baylor game, I'm gonna go ahead and predict a possible blowout here by Oklahoma. I think they could win this game big. So I'm gonna go ahead and say Oklahoma scores, let's say 56. It's 56-28.
Wow. Okay. Hey, where is that game?
Let's find out. I probably should have figured that out before I predicted it.
Well, I think it's at Oklahoma, and if it is, I'm also going to pick an Oklahoma.
It is at Oklahoma.
It's at Oklahoma. Then I'm going to pick an Oklahoma victory, and but I'm going to say it's a little lower scoring, but not a lot. And I'm going to say that it's going to be like 45-21.
Okay, very good. And then our last one then, Michigan Penn State, since you brought that up. I'm actually going to Google Penn State's schedule. I haven't been following them too much because they've been a little disappointing this year based on how people are perceiving them early.
Well, yeah, they've had a couple of unexpected losses or whatever, but they've quietly won a lot of games they were quote quote supposed to win. So they've done okay, but I would say overall you're correct that it's been a disappointing season. Mm-hmm. I think that the near miss at Indiana is going to wake up Michigan a little bit. I think maybe Michigan's defense was not ready for the kind of prolific offense that was presented by Indiana. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think Penn State has shown itself. I think they still have some issues, especially their offensive line in some spots. So I think that Michigan wins this game comfortably by like 17 points. So like maybe what would that be? Like, I don't know, in the 30s for Michigan and about 17 for Penn State.
So we'll go.
So let's do that.
So like 35-17.
Yeah, something like that. 35-17.
Okay. I should point out, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I was doing this bar crawl thing this weekend, but I actually got to watch the end of the Michigan-Indiana game. I saw, in the fourth quarter, there was a bunch of people in that bar cheering for Indiana, and because they had them, like, Michigan, like, I think it was a fourth down, they had to score a touchdown, then they did, which was frustrating. And then I saw them win in the double overtime, so that made me kind of mad they couldn't pull that off.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think Michigan will probably be woken up a little by that Indiana near loss. But I do think, I'm just looking at Penn State's schedule right now, there are 2 losses that they have to Ohio State and to Temple, or actually 3 losses. Ohio State, Temple, and Northwestern have all been away games, and this is at home for the Nittany Lions. So right. I'm going to predict a Michigan victory, but I think it's going to be a closer game. So I'm going to go ahead and say it's going to be 31 to 27.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
All right.
So that's another one I need to watch. And when is that game?
It is 9 o'clock my time, so 12 o'clock Eastern time.
Noon game. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Another reason. Well, that's interesting too. So, okay, good deal.
Yeah. So that'd be back. You watch that game, and coming right off it, you'd have the Michigan State Ohio State game. So that'd be a nice way to wake up.
Yeah.
For us on the West Coast, anyway.
That's right. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that more in one of the future podcasts. Is the experience for you for the first time going through a football season on that West Coast, where you often get up and bam, 9 o'clock games are already on TV.
That's true.
I remember that only in cases like New Year's Day, where a game would start at like 10 o'clock. But right. I never had that growing up or as an adult.
Right. Well, but that means on the reverse side, with those, any game that starts early Eastern time like that would be like 7 o'clock, Pacific time. So that's a scenario where it wouldn't work out so well for us on the West Coast.
Right. No, that's true.
All right. Well, I know I think we were talking about keeping this one shorter, but I knew there was a lot to get to. There was a lot of big games this week, and then lots of upcoming big games, as it turns out. Yeah.
Well, and we'll have to try to get back on track of being more organized with our subject matter. We went a little far afield today.
I don't know. I think it was good. But if you all out there thought we went a little too far afield, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can
that includes you, Brother Mike.
Uh-oh. Well, he's going to be critiqued, huh? You can leave us a comment on the Podomatic website. We're at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can find us on iTunes as well. The Podomatic app are all places you can find us. I post these links up on Facebook all the time if you happen to be my friend, which anyone out there listening probably isn't, but there you go. So yeah, thank you for listening out there, good listeners, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode.
Thank you.
All right, and until next time, college football fans, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.